Throughout history, there haven't been many people as impressive as the Vikings. These tough warriors from the north changed the world forever. People whispered their names, sometimes with fear, sometimes with respect. Today, we're going to learn about one of these legends, Harald Hardrada, the last Viking king. His story is full of big plans, being forced to leave his home, and a never-ending chase for power that ended dramatically on a faraway battlefield. Come with us, as we travel back in time to discover the amazing story of Harald Hardrada, a man who perfectly represented the Viking Age. Harald's story isn't just about wars and winning land. It shows us what life was like in Europe at a very important time. It was a time when the Viking Age was ending and a new time was beginning. His life was a mix of war, political tricks, and personal ambition. If we understand Harald, we understand the changing world around him, a world about to transform. But Harald's story is more than just a history lesson. It's a story about a person. It's about a man who, just like us, had problems, made tough choices, and eventually died. By looking at his successes and failures, we can see the values and beliefs that shaped not just his own life, but the whole Viking Age. So let's travel back in time to the 1000s, to a world of Viking ships, sword fights, and loud battles. Let's follow Harald Hardrada, the last Viking king, and learn about the real person behind the legend. Harald Sigurdsson, later known as Harald Hardrada, which means hard ruler or ruthless, was born into a world filled with Viking stories. It was the year 1015 in Ringerike, Norway. Even as a young boy, Harald saw the tough realities and the exciting appeal of the Viking life. His half-brother was King Olaf II of Norway, who would later be called Saint Olaf. Growing up in the royal family, Harald heard stories of Viking attacks, the sounds of swords, and the desire for glory that was everywhere in Norse culture. This upbringing would strongly influence the person he became. When he was only 15, Harald experienced his first battle, fighting next to his brother at the Battle of Stiklestad in 1030. They fought against Canute the Great, a very powerful and scary king. The battle was a disaster for Harald and Olaf. Canute's army was too strong and Olaf was killed. Harald had to run away to save his life, starting a journey far from home that would change his future in ways he couldn't imagine. Being forced to leave home is hard, especially for a young man with big dreams. But for Harald, it made him a stronger warrior and leader. He ran away from Norway and went east, first to the home of Yaroslav the Wise, the Grand Prince of Kiev. This huge land with many different cultures and people would be Harald's home for the next few years. Yaroslav saw how much potential the young Viking had and gave him a job. Harald, always wanting to show how good he was, quickly became important, improving his skills in the messy world of Eastern European politics and war. The battles there were different from the ones in Norway, with different enemies and different ways of fighting. But Harald wanted more than just the cold lands of the East. He wanted to go south to the amazing city of Constantinople, the center of the Byzantine Empire. This famous city, full of wealth, culture, and power, called to Harald. He answered by joining the famous Varangian Guard, the special bodyguards of the Byzantine Emperor, made up mostly of Norse warriors like him. Years went by, and Harald became more and more successful in the East. He fought in many battles, from the sunny beaches of Sicily to the windy plains of Bulgaria. Some stories even say he traveled as far as the Holy Land, fighting for the Byzantine Emperor. Harald collected a lot of treasure and became known as a brave warrior and a smart leader. But he missed his home, the land where he was born. In 1046, after almost 20 years away, he returned to Norway, a changed man. He wasn't the inexperienced young man who had run away. He was Harald Hardrada, a skilled warrior, a rich leader, and he wanted to be the king of Norway. But becoming king isn't easy. Norway was ruled by Harald's nephew, Magnus the Good, and Harald, with all his experience and ambition, didn't want to be just a helper. A fight for power was unavoidable, a clash between family and ambition. The future of Norway was uncertain, waiting to see who would become king. Harald and his nephew Magnus had a complicated relationship, a mix of family loyalty and a quiet rivalry. At first they ruled Norway together, a shaky agreement made because of dangers from other countries. But things were tense, and it seemed like a fight might happen. Magnus, knowing his uncle wanted to be king, tried to keep him happy by giving him half of his treasures. But Harald, with his warrior spirit and desire for power, wasn't satisfied. He wanted to be the only king. Then, in 1047, Magnus the Good died unexpectedly, leaving Harald as the only ruler of Norway. Now that he was the only king, Harald could finally make his plans for Norway happen. He started many military campaigns to make his power stronger, defeat his enemies, and make Norway more important in the region. He was so ruthless in crushing anyone who disagreed with him that he earned the nickname Hardrada, which showed how determined he was and how harshly he ruled. Even with all the war and politics, Harald Hardrada's personal life was a mix of love, practicality, and the difficulties of power. While he was in the east, he married Elizabeth, the daughter of Grand Prince Yaroslav. This marriage was a smart political move to make alliances stronger and keep his position safe. But Harald's love life wasn't just about politics. He also had a relationship with Tora Torbergsdatter, a noblewoman from Norway. This relationship, whether it was for love or political reasons in Norway, resulted in several sons, including Magnus and Olaf, who both later became kings of Norway. Harald's wives and children weren't just unimportant parts of his story, they were involved in his reign. They were sometimes used, sometimes powerful, and sometimes they suffered because of the power struggles happening in Europe in the 1000s. Their stories show us what life was like for women and children during this difficult time, reminding us that history isn't just about kings and battles, but also about the human stories within the bigger story. Harald Hardrada's time as King of Norway was a time of big change and unrest. He made the kingdom stable, made it more powerful, and protected its borders. His military campaigns, while successful, were costly, using up the kingdom's resources and causing a lot of destruction. Some historians believe Harald's reign was a turning point for Norway. He made the king more powerful, and his changes helped create a more unified and stronger Norway in the future. They talk about his legal changes, his work to improve trade, and his support of the arts as proof of his good leadership. But others don't see Harald's legacy as positively. They say his constant wars and harsh methods made many of his people dislike him and caused future conflicts. They don't like that he wanted to conquer more land, saying it ultimately made Norway weaker in the long run. Harald's legacy, like many powerful rulers, is complicated and has both good and bad parts, and historians still debate it today. By 1066, Harald Hardrada was at the height of his power. He had united Norway, become very wealthy, and was known as one of the greatest warriors of his time. But his ambition, the thing that had always driven him, would eventually lead to his death. Across the North Sea was England, a land ready to be conquered, and Harald, always wanting to conquer, couldn't resist. Harald's claim to the English throne was weak, based on an old agreement with a former English king. Still, he gathered his army, a huge fleet of Viking ships, and sailed to England. What happened next was a quick and brutal campaign that ended at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, a battle that would decide Harald's fate and mark the end of an era. The events of that important day, September 25, 1066, are recorded in history. Harald's army, tired from their journey and a previous battle, were surprised by the English army led by King Harald Godwinson. The Vikings fought bravely, but there were more English soldiers, and they were better led. Harald, always a warrior, charged into the middle of the fight, where he was killed by an arrow. With his death, the Viking Age, a time of raids, conquests, and exploration, came to a dramatic and violent end. Harald Hardrada's story shows us the lasting power of ambition, the complicated nature of legacy, and the enduring appeal of the Viking Age. He was a warrior, a king, and a man who undeniably changed history. His story, told for generations, continues to fascinate and inspire, reminding us of a time when the North Sea was a Viking route, and the fate of nations was decided in battle.